Yesterday, we spoke to Elizabeth Hudson, who told us she was still waiting for answers after finding out that her ex-husband, who's serving a prison sentence for assaulting her, was going to be released early.
Well, later on, Lib Dem MP Josh Babarinde took Elizabeth's story into the Commons and he asked if the Justice Secretary would meet with them both face-to-face to discuss her case.
Well, joining us now is the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. Very good morning to you. We have spoken to you before about Elizabeth Hudson's case. And, in fact, your department reissued a letter which she had not received at the beginning of last month. She has responded, and there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding of her case. She says that the Ministry of Justice simply doesn't understand the sentencing when it comes to domestic abuse, domestic violence. And she writes in her letter to you that these glaring inaccuracies in the understanding of my own case leaves me feeling incredibly concerned. We need to be able to put our faith in you and the system to protect us, but when victims have a better grasp of sentencing than the Ministry of Justice, this is very hard to do. So I'm going to follow up Josh Babarinde's request and say, would you agree to meet Elizabeth Hudson? Because the early release scheme has caused so much anxiety for victims and survivors of domestic violence.
Yes, I will meet with Elizabeth and with the Lib Dem spokesman as well. I believe that actually Josh Babarinde was already due to meet with the Prisons Minister to talk about the policy and also some of his suggestions going forward. I did respond to Ms Hudson's previous letter on the 30th of October. We've again reissued that because I think there was some concern that she might not have received that response, and I responded to that one personally, setting out exactly what had happened with the sentencing in her particular case. But of course, if having received that response, she has further questions, I'll be happy to meet her and discuss with her in more depth.
Yes, because as I pointed out, she says that there's a misunderstanding of the sentencing. And we interviewed you very robustly about that just a few weeks ago. There's one particular point that I think a lot of people will be still concerned about. Elizabeth Hudson said to you, why don't you exclude from early release any offender who's been issued with a restraining order to protect the victim of their crime? Now, you've pointed out if someone has breached their restraining order, then yes, they're excluded from early release. But victims of domestic violence whose perpetrators are under a restraining order feel very anxious that the person who is under the restraining order is now going to be released early from prison. Can you not exclude them? Because there's obviously a reason for the restraining order, and part of the comfort that comes to the victim is the person's behind bars. Can you not exclude them?
No, look, I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding here because the restraining order, of course, when someone is in prison, they are denied their liberty anyway. The restraining order takes effect when they are outside of prison, i.e. ultimately released into the community. And if they breach that, they can go straight back in. They also have other licence conditions, including exclusion zones and you know, things of that order, which, again, if breached, you're straight back in prison. So the offence in law is when you breach a restraining order. That is to say, a court can put you under an order, and if you abide by that order, there are no further consequences. It's designed to keep you away from the person that you abused and maintain their safety. But if you breach it in any way, then, of course, that is the offence for which you can be either prosecuted afresh or, if it's in breach of your licence conditions, go straight back in. But I'd be happy to... The picture in relation to Ms Hudson's specific case is a little bit complicated because there were a number of offences that the offender who had attacked her was sentenced to. And when there are multiple sentences, it can be a little bit confusing. I'm very happy to meet with her on the exclusions that we brought into the emergency release scheme. As I've explained before, you can only exclude offences, that is to say, when committed, these are crimes, and not classes of offender. So that's why you couldn't have a generic exclusion for domestic abusers, you have to look at the offences specifically, and that's why we excluded some offences specifically that we believe are connected to domestic abuse. I have sought to pull every lever at my disposal to try and do this in a way that creates the space in our prisons, because we were about to overflow, get information to victims, give probation the time they need to prepare. I hope your viewers can understand, in an emergency situation, there's not that many options on the table, and I have pulled every lever I can to allay the concerns of people like Ms Hudson and others, but I will happily meet with them
I've got to break in, because we only have a short period of time. I'm sure Elizabeth Hudson, I don't want to speak for her, but I'm sure she'll be... It's pleasing to us to know that you're going to meet with her. I think the issue is very complex. Are we still going to run out of space? Have you ended early release, or is it still on the table?
Well, look, I never want to be in a position where we ever have to do emergency release again. We have today published our 10-year capacity strategy and also the annual prison capacity statement as well. And it shows that we will deliver 14,000 prison places by 2031. So we will be building more prisons and creating more space in our prisons. But what it also shows for the first time is what's happening to demand for prison places. So even with record building, we are still going to ultimately run out of prison places, because the demand is running faster than it would be possible to build in order to keep up with it. And that's why a few weeks ago I launched the independent review into sentencing, because we need to make sure that we're able to run a sustainable prison system so that we never run out of prison places again.
But from the beginning of that answer, it sounds to me that what you're saying is that, yes, you'd rather not release more prisoners early to relieve overcrowding, but you might well have to, because obviously this prison building programme is going to take, as you say, years and years and years. So back to the here and now, when can we next expect to see? Because I think from what you said, we can expect to see another tranche of prisoners getting out of prison early.
Well, so the SDS 40, those two tranches have already happened, and now it's a forward-going measure, which I said when I announced it in Parliament that we would review in 18 months' time to see where we are at, and I'd expect the sentencing review also to make recommendations here. I've already announced in Parliament other operational measures to try and make sure that we don't run out of prison places, and that's on, greater use of the home detention curfew scheme, which the last government extended to 6 months, which we are extending to 12 months in order to, again, make sure we don't run out of prison places. When I brought in the emergency release scheme, it was supposed to buy us around a year before we run out of prison places again. But the impact of the summer of disorder and the cases that are coming through the system means that actually we reach critical capacity a lot earlier. And so obviously I've had to consider other operational measures.
I want to bring you back to your answer to Susanna's question about restraining orders, because it seems to me this is a really important point. I think the thrust of the question was that if there is a restraining order in force on one of these prisoners who's basically domestically attacked his partner, it's a fingerprint on the case. It's a clear indication that there was a domestic aspect to it. And you say, and we've read your letter very closely that you sent, and it went astray on November the 1st, that you would love to be able to help more, but your hands are tied legally. Well, surely in your position of new power, you can find a way to untie your hands legally, close this loophole, and not release prisoners who may not technically have a conviction for domestic abuse, but who are clearly domestic abusers. Surely there's a way forward on this, not just shrugging it off and saying, well, my hands are tied.
Well, I can assure you I haven't shrugged it off. I've looked very carefully at every lever that I can pull in order to deal with cases like Miss Hudson's and others. I'm very concerned that, of course, victims, my heart goes out to people who now know that the offender might come out a few weeks or months earlier than had originally been planned. This is not a measure I wanted to pull. And in terms of hands being tied legally, to move at pace, we've had to bring in this measure so that we didn't run out of prison places. And again, I hope your viewers could understand, running out of prison places creates many more thousands of victims in the country and really has a massive impact on law and order in this country, because if you run out, you have to shut the front door into prisons or open the back door out. So I've tried to pull these levers under time constraint because we've had to do so in an emergency way. Obviously, if we're able to change and bring in more legislation, that takes time to pass through the Commons, and we did not have that time.
Well, you talk about time constraints.
Let me just finish the answer, if you don't mind, because I have, in order to allay some of these concerns, I have asked the sentencing review panel to specifically consider the way that we deal with those who commit violence against women and girls, and I hope that the sentencing review is able to help us get into a more sensible position when it looks at sentencing sentencing in the round to give confidence to victims of domestic abuse. It is a specific element that I've asked the Sentencing Review to look at.
OK.
Thank you.
Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood, thank you very much indeed.